I want to pray with you, but first I want to ask if you would please just let your friends know that the American Campfire Revival is back up and running for the final 100 days of the year. This is day 9 of 100. We're talking about the mandates of heaven. Dictators love to throw down commands that ultimately give them more power and strip people of freedom. If you feel like that's happening in your country, in my country, it's good for us to pay attention to history, which gives us clues about what could be coming next so that we know what to do. And one of the things that our forefathers told us is that we must humble ourselves and pray. We must ask for the help of heaven to have wisdom to know how to act wisely. And so I want to ask you if you join me in prayer right now. I want to just wait for a couple more minutes for a few more people to join on. If you've not yet shared this with your friends, let them know to join us on Facebook, join us on Instagram, and on YouTube. We're live across all 3 platforms right now and have some really exciting stuff to talk to you about so that you can be equipped to play your role well on the world stage as we're in this very challenging part of history, his story. And we want to make sure that we play our part well. All right, let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, all of creation demonstrates your power and your creative genius. God, you are the one who can get us out of this mess that we're in. And we know that all throughout history you have worked miracles through the family of faith. And when your power is flowing through us, nothing is impossible. God, we ask you to look inside of our hearts, see if there's any wicked way in us, and lead us in the right way. God, we want to repentantly reaffirm our commitment and our covenant with you, individually as people, as families, and as the family of faith. We want to lead this nation back into covenant with you, into that sacred relationship that brings us the kind of peace and freedom and blessing and protection that we long for. But even more than that, we want you to be honored, you to be glorified, and you to be exalted. Because even more important than our freedom and blessing is that you are magnified and glorified, because you are the source of life and freedom and blessing, and you deserve our worship. So make us sincere-hearted worshipers and obedient servants. This is the joy of our life, and we thank you for this and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, let's see. I told you that we were going to be talking today about why some people are not able to see what's going on. Some people just seem to be under the delusion that things are going to go back to normal sometime soon, not understanding that all of history sends us the message that people are in a mad dash to grab power, and in grabbing power, stripping other people of freedom. I just spoke with my friend Eric Metaxas this morning, who wrote the book Bonhoeffer. He wrote all sorts of historical biographies of heroes. And heroes are typically full of courage. And history is full of heroes who had courage. And they would tell you that courage does not exist in the absence of fear. In fact, courage only exists in the presence of fear. It's not the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing in the presence of fear. And those fearful things throughout history are almost always people in positions of power subjugating people under them and using those subjugated people to divide with one another, to fight with one another in order to make it easier for them to take power. And often the family of faith is manipulated by these people in political power And they use the church and religion to manipulate and to subdue people through fear. And that is wicked. And yet history is full of that story. It was very interesting talking with Eric. He wrote a brand new book called Is Atheism Dead? And many would think that atheism is alive and well. And the truth is, atheism is like a corpse that's actually animated by those who want to use it. But the truth is, the majority of the world is religious. Look all over the world. You look on every continent in the world, and you will find that religion and faith dominate. People pray. People look up. People look inside, and they know because they're made in the image of God. They look all around them, and they see that what can be known of God in general terms is obvious through the things that he has made. But atheism is the favorite religion of dictators and tyrants, because what they do is they really want to be God. They want to be the supreme leader power over everybody else. And so what they do is they suppress the truth about God because they want to be God. That's what the Bible even tells us, that what can be known about God is obvious through the things God has made, but they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They love their sin, their selfishness, and their ego and arrogance allows some dictators to convince themselves that God is dead. And we see this atheism appears to be the popular religion in many higher education institutions. And PhDs are often referred to as PhDeities by some of my doctor friends because they have friends who like to deny God's existence, who gave them the brain to become a doctor, and they want to actually sort of consider themselves to be more powerful, more intelligent, and part of an elite class. So atheism is actually a silly, dead philosophy that is just popular among those who actually have a bit of a God complex. But for the family of faith, we understand that we are creatures. He is the creator, and we are so grateful for what he's done for us in sending his son to pay for our sin and grant us life and bring us into relationship with him. Okay, that was church for the morning, for the evening. I'm going to get into one of the ways that those who hate God throw up a smokescreen so that we don't understand how to move forward in our nation. And again, I'm looking through the American Covenant book and highlighting these important concepts. One of these smokescreens that we've been told for decades now is that there's this great separation between church and state. And it's sort of this phrase that's used to get God out of government. It's an attempt to eliminate religious influence upon any kind of government. You see, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, if you look at our forefathers and you look at our foremothers, they came across from England and they were used to monarchs who were dictators who controlled the church. And so they had a healthy fear of government dominating and using religion to control people. And so they wanted government to stay in their lane. They wanted government to keep their hands out of the church. And that understanding was passed on to the founders. And so when they wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they put protections in there to make sure that the government stayed inside of its lane. And listen to this. The founders didn't want God out of government. It wanted the government to get its hands out of religion, because religion needed to be free. People in the family of faith needed to be free to teach their children so that they would have character, so that when the government is looking for new leaders, there is a whole host of boys and girls who have grown up with the principles of true religion and are now men and women of virtue and character, and they can govern the nation well. And so, in fact, the government needs the church desperately. Listen to what George Washington said. George Washington said, "True religion offers the government its surest support." Do you get that? The government will actually topple over if it does not have the support of the church and true religion, which they understood to be Christianity. The government cannot perform its duty. It cannot function properly without the church, without the family of faith. Because in order to govern well and not turn into a tyrant, a dictator, again, you remember the lure of the ring in the Lord of the Rings. Nobody could handle it. It would turn them into monsters if they had that kind of power. They needed virtue. They needed a pure heart. That's what Frodo had. And that comes from true faith, true religion, which produces the fear of God, the love of God, keeps us humble, and gives us the desire to honor God and to serve one another. Those are the people that you want in positions of leadership and government. Even then, though, our founders knew that that power had to be limited and it had to be decentralized, because the lure of power can even overcome those in the family of faith. Listen to this. John Winthrop said this. He said, "It may do for other countries and other governments to talk about the state supporting religion. But here, under our own free institutions, that's America, it is religion which must support the state." Check that out. In other countries, pick your country, it's the government who says, okay, you can have your church. Okay, we'll support you. We'll give you money so that you can have your programs of religion. And the government supports the church. We'll tell you what you can say in church. We'll have our Nazi churches. We'll have our government religion that's sanctioned by the government, and it's actually controlled by the government. It's not free. But he said, here in our free republic, it is the church that must support the government. Because the church is the little factory, the little workshop that actually produces the character necessary so our government leaders don't become tyrants. It produces the character that we need, and it depends on it. You know, I'll tell you where the separation of church and state phrase came from. Did it come from the Constitution? No. Did it come from the Bill of Rights? No. In fact, it's not in our founding documents. It came from a phrase in a personal letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Church in Danbury, Connecticut. And the concern of this church was, Mr. Jefferson, what kind of government do we have here? Is the government going to control what we do in church, or are we free to love and worship God as we please, according to the Bible? And he said, don't worry, I'm paraphrasing, there is a separation between church and state, meaning the government must stay in its lane according to this form of government. Now, of course, we've got to hold them accountable, because if we don't, they'll try to usurp the authority of the church and of the family, and they'll just run right over it, and they'll blur the line, and they'll take power. And so we need to hold the government accountable. But according to our free nation, the government has nothing to do with your faith and your religion. That was the protection for the church, the separation of government from meddling in the church. So important to understand this. If we look at what the First Amendment, which is the Freedom of Religion Clause, actually says, it says, and this is a sort of a modern English version, the federal government will make no law having anything to do with supporting a national denominational church, meaning there's not going to be the American church, there's not going to be the United States faith, and the government's going to make laws saying you all have to be part of that church. No, they're not going to do that. That's what England did. It was called the Church of England. You had to be part of it. They said, no, forget that. We want to worship God according to his words and follow the mandates of heaven, not the mandates of King James. Nor will they prohibit the free exercise of religion, meaning they're not going to shut the doors of your church. If the government stays in its lane, that's not their business. That's not their job. They can't create a state government church and make you be a part of it, and they can't stop you from freely worshiping God according to the dictates of your heart as you follow the mandates of heaven. That's the separation that protects the church and keeps the government out of it. That's what the First Amendment says. And that's what Thomas Jefferson wrote to that little church. And all of it together keeps reinforcing our theme that covenant keepers win and covenant breakers lose. We just need to stick around long enough to see the end of the story. And what we're seeing now proves that what our founders said is true. Our government is experiencing moral bankruptcy. When we look around, we see men and women who have abandoned the principles that have produced the blessing and freedom that have allowed them to be in these positions. And many of them are no longer servants of God and a blessing to the people, but they're causing the people to groan in misery because they're stripping people of freedoms and abusing them. Not all of them, and I thank God. And you and I are called to pray for those men and women in leadership, governors, rulers, who are in those positions. Pray for them to have wisdom to make good decisions. And I thank God for the members of the family of faith who are there. And pray for those who are atheists, that they would come to their senses and that they would fall on their knees and realize that they are not God, and that they would love God and they'd embrace him by faith. The government needs to be born again. The government, in a spiritual sense, they need to get saved. The government doesn't save us. God saves us. And God needs to save our government, and that's why we need to be praying for them. And when I say government, I'm talking about federal government, state government, local government. We just had some mandates come down here in the city of Los Angeles that are some of the most broad and far-reaching and nasty. And you can just check that out by looking it up online. I want to remind you that the mandates of heaven are the creation mandate, the cultural mandate, and the Great Commission. The creation mandate and the cultural mandate, these are orders that have come down from the chief executive officer of heaven, and that is to be fruitful and multiply. There's the creation mandate. We're to create children and send them into the world to live and love like Jesus. And we are to fill the earth with them, and then God says in the cultural mandate to take dominion over all that he's made. That is to govern all that he's made, to beautify and to order and heavenize all that he's made. Just like Adam and Eve were in the garden and they were told to tend and keep the garden, to work it, to protect it, I believe that the cultural commission is meant for them to have children and expand the borders of that place where they live so that the Garden of Eden begins to grow and grow and grow, and you push the boundaries and borders of it all the way out until they wrap around the globe and touch on the other side. And pretty soon, all of the earth is filled with the goodness and the glory of God, just like the waters fill the seas. And the Great Commission, where Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the gospel and disciple all nations, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. There's a mandate from heaven. And the only way that we're able to create a heavenly culture on earth is when we're not staying in our little holy huddles, cooped up in our church and Bible studies and prayer meetings. Those are necessary for the going out into the world and preaching the gospel. And people will have their hearts transformed by the power of God, and they then move into positions in our school boards, in our city councils, and men and women who love one another in marriage and raise their children well will be the driving force of bringing heaven to earth. And I'm so encouraged because I'm seeing people catch this and do this. They're not just tucking their head between their knees as believers, waiting for God to beam us up and get us out of here before the world collapses. They realize that this is God's world. He made it and he said it's good. And he's reconciling the whole world to himself through the power of heaven, working through mandates from above, being followed by the family of faith. That's us. I met a lady the other day who said she's running for office. I'm seeing videos of mama bears waking up and standing up and speaking at school board meetings and city council meetings. Entrepreneurs who are now starting new businesses rather than just sinking after being fired and throwing their hands up and giving up after their exemptions have been denied. They're saying, no, we need to do what we should have been doing for the last 50 years, for the last 100 years. And that is creating our own businesses and our own systems and our own distribution channels so that we can begin to create a culture that reflects the beauties of heaven rather than the horrors of hell. I believe that God has his hand on the forming of our nation, and I believe that God has his hand on what we're going through right now, and he's working all things together for good for those of us who love him and have been called according to his purpose. If you think I don't feel like I'm called because I'm not equipped to do much, listen. God knows our abilities and capabilities. He doesn't call those who are super equipped. He equips those he calls. His eyes are roaming to and fro all across the earth, looking for what? For people who are smart and strong and rich? No. He's looking to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are loyal to him. That's what he's looking for. And my prayer is that you would cultivate loyalty in your heart to God. That's another way of saying, God, I want to be in covenant with you. Just like it says here in this book we're studying, the American Covenant. God, we depend upon you. We recognize that you're the source of our blessing and protection. And we know that you will hold up your end of the promise if we will hold up our end of the agreement. And that is to humbly obey the promises in your word and the commands from heaven, the mandates from above, because they always lead to our joy and they lead to your glory. Ask God to cultivate that in your heart. If you don't yet have this book, I recommend that you get it and read it along with me. The original American Covenant is something that I've worked together with the author of this book and printed up the essence of that covenant that you can reaffirm as a family. And we're gathering in churches and farms and fields all across the nation for nights of revival, and I hope that you'll join us. The next one is going to be this Sunday in Texarkana. If you go to the website, kirkcameron.com, click on the tour dates, and I want you to join us. It's free. It's a free night of revival under the stars. We're going to be worshiping together, praying together, and going through the principles that will lead to the reforming of our nation under God. And I want you to be there. Like I said, it's free, and it's a night that you will not forget. And I hope that you will join us. So God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. See you then.